I said last night that there are three topics that will dominate the federal election, and they are the cost of living and two policy areas that directly feed into it. They are the electricity supply and affordability crisis and plans to deal with our record out-of-control immigration intake. The numbers on cost of living and our standard of living tell a woeful story. We've been in a per capita recession for almost 2 years under Labor. In other words, for most of Labor's time in office, we've been getting poorer as individuals and families. And a Deloitte Access Economics report out today says it will be another 5 years before we claw our way back to the living standards we enjoyed before the pandemic. Little wonder, isn't it, that cost of living is the political talking point here, much like it was in last year's American presidential election.
We've seen a reduction in living standards here that is unprecedented. It's been a faster and a deeper collapse in living standards than we have ever seen, around 7.8%. So if people out there are feeling poorer, it's not all in your heads. You in fact are poorer. You're poorer than you were 3 years ago.
Still, there was promising news for the Labor government today and perhaps for taxpayers, with inflation down. Treasurer Jim Chalmers, smug as ever, said he wasn't claiming mission accomplished while he was effectively claiming mission accomplished.
Inflation is down, wages are up, unemployment is low, and 1.1 million jobs have been created during the course of this Albanese Labor government. Now, the soft landing that we have been planning for and preparing for is now looking more and more likely.
Now, the trouble for Chalmers and Labor is that while it seems like sweetness and light to them, Australian families and small businesses are still hurting. And while Labor's extra spending, for instance, using more of your money to temporarily subsidise downward pressure on power prices, while that has helped push the headline inflation rate down from 2.8 to 2.4%, the underlying rate, or trimmed mean, remains above the 3% target at 3.2%. So the Reserve Bank should not be fooled by Labor's trickery. It knows there's still a bump to come. Yet it's clear the Albanese government is trying to pressure the RBA to cut rates next month. That is, before the election.
We take no outcome for granted when it comes to interest rates, and again, it's not for me to give free advice to the Independent Reserve Bank. I respect their independence. They will weigh up these numbers and other numbers that we've seen in the economy since they last met, and they'll come to a decision and communicate that decision in February. And I'm not going to get in the way of that. I'm not going to predict it or preempt it or give them free advice.
Not much. His whole press conference could be construed as advice to cut rates and cut them in February. In the hot seat is the RBA Governor, Michelle Bullock. A rate cut on the cusp of an election campaign will be seen as a boost for Labor and help them rush to the polls on April the 12th, the date I tipped for you last year. But remember, the RBA controversially increased interest rates on the Howard government in the 2007 election campaign, clearly a mistake because it was cutting savagely within a year. And it increased rates again just before the last election, again a political blow to the coalition. Would they really cut next month, giving Labor a boost when the key figure remains above the target range? Clearly, the markets and the major banks think this is on the cards. The coalition is trying to avoid that debate and talk about broader cost of living issues.
The cost of living pressures are affecting all Australians. The cost of doing business pressures, which we just heard about, are affecting all businesses across Australia, and that suffering continues. Now, we see the inflation data out today, and we see that core inflation is stubbornly above target.
Look, homeowners need a rate cut, but the worst thing in the world is a rate cut too soon, only to see inflation take off again. I think if you look at what Michelle Bullock has said over the past year, she'd be making a mockery of her own logic if she cut rates now. It'd look like she'd caved into political or market pressure. Still, whatever way it goes, the real story is the cost of living. Labor promised to make things better for all of us.
We will put in place mechanisms that provide cost of living relief.
Under Labor, you'll have a government which cares about cost of living and has plans to deal with it.
I'll build people's living standards up.
A better future with real plans to address the cost of living.
And to ease the pressure that too many Australians are feeling.
Yeah, another massive broken promise, and no matter what happens with rates next month, we will all be worse off at the next election than we were at the last, and dramatically worse off than Labor promised. And that's the most important indicator that no one can change before polling day. I'll have plenty more on this tonight.